Good morning, everybody. We are learning from home today because it is Labor Day in America. Today's weather in Carmiel is hot. Today's weather in Beersheba, I assume, is even hotter. Today's weather in Pittsburgh, rainy, humidity at 108%. So that's not a
Ooh,
scientific
wow.
measure.
Wow.
It's pretty common here. The month of August, the first year I lived here, it rained like every day for the first month I lived here, and then I learned that I lived in a tropical rainforest. And I discovered why houses are cheap, but maintenance cost on your house is unbelievably expensive. So, all right, with that, we're gonna do some Talmud. Really interesting piece of text this morning. It should be really fun to rip through. We're gonna do something we don't normally do, which is slow down and dive into a pasuk. Um, there's an old joke in rabbinical school that conservative rabbis learn Tanakh by seeing the citations quoted in the Talmud. So we will actually be doing that today. Although it is actually a somewhat familiar piece of text, and in fact, I believe it's a Haftorah too. That's a thing that I kind of never know. We're gonna go back up a little bit to the Mishnah just so we know what's up. And the last thing is a disclaimer and an apology. This would be a good one, not great, but a good one for me to have my shofar on me. But alas, because of the month of Elul, I moved my shofar over to Beth Shalom, where my Gemara also is. So, and I'm working from home today so that our maintenance guys can have as few hours as possible staffing the front door. They only have to open up and for morning minion and for evening minion. I hope. I don't know. I actually don't exactly know how the sausage is made with the maintenance scheduling. I'm hoping to kind of figure that out, but I think it has to be done in reasonable sized chunks for logical reasons. You don't want to call a guy in to unlock a door and then send him home, only give him an hour's worth of labor. I'm thinking a lot on Labor Day, and then call him back later. And I do mean him. All our maintenance guys are guys. Well, no, I take it back. We have one maintenance gal. We have sis. All right, with that, Mark, will you read the Mishnah to us in the English and I'll do the Hebrew? Matnitin, Seder Tkiya, Shalosh, Shel, Shalosh, Shalosh. Shiur Tkiya, Keshalosh, Truot. Shiur Trua, Keshalosh, Yavavot. Taka Barishona, Umashach Bashniya, Kishtaim, Ein Beyado Ele Achat.
Mishnah. The order of the blast is 3 sets of 3 blasts each, which are Tkiya, Tru'ah, and Tkiya. The length of a Tkiya is equal to the length of 3 Tru'ot, and the length of a Tru'ah is equal to the length of 3 whimpers. If one sounded the first Tkiya of the initial series of Tkiya, Tru'ah, Tkiya, and then extended the second Tkiya of that series to the length of 2 Tkiyot, so that it should count as both the second Tkiya of the first set and the first Tkiya of the second set, he has in his hand the fulfillment of only 1 Tkiya, and he must begin the second set with a new Tkiya.
Okay. We live a little bit in the mystery about the first section. The shot, based on what we all experience, is that the series is broken up to 1 blast, 3 blasts, and 3 sets of 3, which we call 9 blasts. And the names are a little bit confusing because we know a teruah to be like a series of 9 blasts, but they're not really referring to it as such. And we don't know the word yevava, which is the word whimper. But a yevava is they're kind of implying here in the Mishnah that there are 3 names for the blast: tekiah, teruah, and yevava. Okay, and we're interpreting the possibility that a trua is the length of 3 yevavas. So on some level, the way the Mishnah is kind of explaining this is a tekiah is the length of 3 teruot, and a trua is equal to 3 yevavot, which implies yevavot are like 1/3 of a tekiah, and truot are 3 sets, are the length of 3 yevavas, right? Which does kind of show how you could understand that a truah is The weird thing about this is, and we didn't talk about this last time because I don't think I fully understood what they were trying to get at, is the order that they're kind of throwing out here is 1 comma 9 comma 3 comma in terms of the thing. The other thing that they're doing is they're not focused so much on how long the blast is. They're focused on the division of how the blast is. So if your tekiah was then your trua would be it would be super staccato, right? You have to keep them all even, but there's no minimum length. Now, how you would explain the measure of time of the tekiah, I don't know. By the way, this is all. I'll tell you a quick story. My friend Shalom studied to be a shochet in Israel with a Sephardi shochet, which was a great thing for him to do. He took an extra year of rabbinical school. The thing that's funny about that is he's been a pulpit rabbi in Detroit and in upstate New York for his entire career, and he hasn't shechted an animal in like 20 years, to be honest. So he took a whole year off to learn shechita, and he does not use it. Which is why I just went to rabbinical school and didn't take any side quests. But anyways, he once was assigned to read the main Shechita manual in Hebrew, and he read this whole thing and he mastered it. And he went in one day, and the shochet that he was training with said, now, when you cut the jugular of the chicken, you hold it like this, and you do this, and you twist that, and you move this, and you do. And he kind of stopped and he said, but it says in the book that you do this and this and this. It doesn't say anything about doing this and this and this. And his friend, the person he was mentoring with, said, you can't learn shechita by the book. You have to do it in practice. And I think that's a great example for why this Mishnah isn't really that helpful for us as shofar blowers, because we all know what the shofar properly sounds like because we've heard someone blow shofar, right? Trying to figure out what a tekiah, a teruah, and a shavarim are from the Mishnah and how long the blasts are is like, I think, kind of impossible, right? Like, if I didn't know what these things sounded like, I don't think this would really help me that much. So that's thing one. Thing two is the back end of this Mishnah, which we've already talked about before we move on, which is that if you kind of, it's clear from here that there are sets, right? Tekiah, shavarim, tekiah, If your final tekiah in the set isn't sharply delineated from the first tekiah in the second set, tekiah, and you don't have any pause between the two of them, did you do 2 tekiyot with a very poor pause, or did you really do 1 tekiah and you're chayev to go back and do that tekiah all over again? By the way, I mean, we don't really have this problem anymore because there is a caller who calls the note before the blower blows the note in the shofar service. We are probably talking about malchuyot, zichronot, and shofarot, in which in the repetition there is a calling, but usually if for those synagogues where they do silent, which is usually only in Sephardic synagogues, to my experience, there isn't a caller, right? Because it would obviate the need for a second person to interrupt their Amidah in order to blow shofar. The idea here is that the Baal Tekiah, the person who blows shofar, will pause their own repetition of the Amidah, or their own first private statement of the Amidah in order to blow the shofar. So you wouldn't want to stop someone else. So in that case, that's probably, if I were to extrapolate backward, that's probably what we're talking about. So, but what we get from the Mishnah is he has in his hand the fulfillment of only 1 tekiah, parenthesis, and he or she has not fulfilled the obligation of the second section and would have to go back and do that all over again. If you screwed up your set of tekiah, shavarim, teruah, you have tekiah, shavarim, tekiah, you have to go back and do it all over again as if you never did the set at all, which is similar for us who have ever davened Amidah and forgotten to do Yale v'Yavo and got all the way to Sim Shalom and finished. The Talmud tells us that we have to go all the way back and do the whole Amidah all over again. However, if you have like past the point of Yale V'Yavo and gotten to not the end of Amidah, you can go back and fix that one Yale V'Yavo that you missed before you've closed your entire Amidah, even if you put it out of place. That's both my opinion and a minority opinion of the Talmud. All right, with that, let's keep going. Paula, will you read the English of these two paragraphs? I'll do the Hebrew. Mi sheberach. I'm going to make it. Should I make it smaller? I'll make it smaller. It'll make it a little easier. Mi sheberach achar kach nitmana lo shofar tokea umaria v'tokea shalosh pa'amim keshem sheshaliach tzibor chayav kach kol hayechid v'yechid chayav. Rabban Gamliel Omer Shaliach Tzibor Motzi Et Harabim Yedei Chovatan.
With regard to one who recited the blessings of the additional prayer, and only afterward a shofar became available to him, he sounds a tekiah sounds, a teruah, and sounds a tekiah. In order, he repeats 3 times. Just as the prayer leader is obligated in the prayer of Rosh Hashanah, so too each and every individual is obligated in these prayers. Rabbi Gamliel disagrees and says individuals are not obligated as the prayer leader fulfills the obligation on behalf of the many.
Great. So you start the Amidah, and you're in my synagogue in Erie, Pennsylvania. Let's use my first year as an example, in which, as I've told you before, all of our stuff was in storage, and we didn't have our house yet, so I didn't have a shofar that year. And you're halfway through the Musaf Amidah, and the president of the synagogue ambles up to you. Paula, you got to meet my president of my synagogue this past week, Doris, who we love. Doris drove all the way down for my installation from Erie, Doris and Jeff, and then drove all the way back to Erie. It's a 2-hour drive, so real mensches, really like them. They drive. You're in the middle of the Musaf, and the president ambles over to you and taps you on the arm and says, "Rabbi, you're supposed to blow shofar during Musaf." And you go, "Oh my God, I totally forgot. Where's a shofar?" They go, "Well, there's one locked up in the cabinet by the gift shop." Well, where are the keys to the gift shop? They're in the office. They're also locked up. So you go to the sexton who goes to the gabbai who goes to the beadle. By the way, sexton and beadle are the same word as gabbai. And they get the key for the office, and then they get the other key for the gift shop, and they pull out the shofar, and you've already finished the Amidah, right? So what do? It says only afterwards a shofar is available. You do tekiah, teruah, tekiah 3 times, and you're done, okay? So why is this here? What does this mean? Is this really a common occurrence that the person doing Musaf doesn't actually have a shofar on them? I don't know, but this is what the Mishnah says to do. Since we haven't actually kind of gone through what else one would do in the regular Musaf repetition, we're still not clear about what the sets are. That line is kind of funny because it tells us what to do in exigent circumstances, but we're not entirely clear on what to do in normal circumstances. We'll probably talk about that next week when we are going through what the Gemara says about how to do things in normal circumstances, and then we can look at the halacha. By the way, my Gemara is not with me either since I'm at home. So even if I wanted to look at the halacha, it would take me a lot longer to look up. So that's where we're at with the Mishnah. And then this final line, as we talked about last time, the Talmud is being completionist and finishing out an idea that it has brought up in Brachot, brought up in earlier chapters of our tractate of Rosh Hashanah. I'm going to make it bigger now. And brought up only recently, which is whether the person who's leading services discharges the obligation for everyone else, or whether only the individual can discharge their own obligation. Okay, with that we move on to the Gemara, which is actually the beginning of us covering new ground. Elisheva, will you read the English here for us? And I will do the Aramaic. Gemara, Vehatanya. Vehatanya always introduces a kasha, a challenge to a statement that we had earlier, using a baraita, right? So it's going to be a parallel text from the same time as the Mishnah, which says something different than what we are used to doing. Vehatanya, shiur tekiah ketrua, amar Abaye, tana didan, ka chashiv tekiah de kulhu, babe trua de kulhu babe, tana bara ka chashiv chad bava vitu la.
The Gemara raises a difficulty. Although the Mishnah taught that the length of a tekiah is equal to the length of 3 truot, isn't it taught that in a baraita that the length of a single tekiah is equal to the length of an entire teruah, which is comprised of several shorter sounds? Abaye said, there is no difficulty. The Tana of our Mishnah counts the tekiah of all the sets of blasts and the teruot of all the sets. He means that the length of the 3 tekiot is equal to the length of the 3 teruot. Conversely, the Tana of the Baraita counts the first tekiah of only one set and no more. And therefore, he simply states that the length of one tekiah is equal to the length of one truah.
Okay. This is very
That is as clear as mud to me.
It's really confusing, right? And my interpretation of this is this, and I'm with you. This is not that helpful. It's like, oh, I'm going to make it all make sense for you. And the answer is, this makes less sense to me. But here's my interpretation of what just happened. Remember last week, we were a little confused because truah is da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, right? It's the 9 sound. And I think what's happening here is our Gemara is basically raising the same problem, which is the truah, in terms of length of time and the number of blasts, is 9. And it's being equated in length of time to a tekiah, right? And that's a little confusing in terms of like, are they really the same length? And the answer is, well, we're not talking about the individual blast of tekiah or the individual blast of teruah. We're asking about the length of the sets, okay? So how long is the set tekiah, shavarim, teruah? And is the set as long as a tekiah, teruah, tekiah? And the answer is yes. The sets need to be roughly the same length, not the individual blasts. So if your tekiah is and your teruah is in which your notes, the number of bars in the notes is actually longer than the other thing, is that permitted? This baraita implies yes, it is. What you're trying to do is make sure each of the sets is roughly the same length as the other set. That's my interpretation of this. But again, it goes back to my friend Shalom. Who said if you try and learn shechita out of the book, you're gonna have a hard time, right? I was not trained how to blow shofar by learning this Gemara, right? I'll give you another example of this in the Talmud. There's a section, and this is a funny story, but it goes backwards because it shows that my Talmud teacher was really brilliant and I'm a moron. I came to rabbinical school. This is a true story. I came to rabbinical school one day in my 4th year, having bought a sense of the tzitzit with techelet, the blue thread in them, in Israel. And I had 2 sets of talitot. I had a set that had the white tzitzit in them that I got from my bar mitzvah. And I had another set that I made myself. And I made the talit myself. Some of you in Pittsburgh have seen it. It's black and white stripes, and that's because it was the piece of fabric that I could get at the fabric store. And the idea of a talit is that it's a ketonet pasim, that it's a coat of many colors, although the Hebrew translation of ketonet pasim literally just means a coat with stripes. So that's why talitot are black and white, or black and blue, or white and blue, with stripes, and not rainbow colored typically. Although I do have a rainbow colored one too, which I never use. And so this talit that I had, I tied tzitzit on it. And I tied tzitzit, the blue techelet tzitzit on it, the way I had been taught to tie regular tzitzit. And I'm in rabbinical school, and an hour after davening in the morning, Rabbi Dan Shevitz, who was the rabbi in Venice, California, and also my Gemara teacher in 2nd year, came up to me and said, "Mark, I saw you had techelet on your tzitzit, on your talit." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Did you tie them yourself?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a different way to tie them if you have techelet than if they're white." And I said, "Oh, really? What would I do?" He says, No joke. This is literally what he said. He said, "Look in Menachot 55b," and then he walks away. Menachot, Menachot is a tractate of Talmud that deals with sacrifices, and it also happens to strangely have the section of Gemara that deals with both tzitzit and tefillin. And I did look in Menachot 55b, and to Elisheva's point about this being as clear as mud, I could not make heads or tails of how to tie things. Now, thank God today we have YouTube. If you need to learn how to tie a tefillin knot or tie tzitziot, you can watch how to do it on YouTube. So what I did actually is I figured out what he was talking about from a YouTube video, and I went back, and because I am a rabbi and a dork, rather than take his opinion, I left 2 tzitzit on my talit. This is true. I left 2 of them the same as I had originally tied them, and I tied 2 others according to the way the Talmud told me to tie them. If you're interested, the way of tying tzitzit in the traditional way with white is you go 7, 8, 11, 13 in the number of loops before the knots. So there's 7 loops and then a knot, 8 loops and then a knot, 11 loops and then a knot, 13 loops and then a knot. It's not as hard as it sounds. The way to do it if you have techelet is really interesting. This is a nice, for those who are interested, this is a nice digression. You go 3 blue, 3 white, 3 blue, knot. 3 white, 3 blue, 3 white, knot. 3 blue, 3 white, 3 blue, knot. 3 white, 3 blue, 3 white, knot. That's how you do it. That's according to one opinion. There's a different set of techelet that I bought also a couple times ago when I was in Israel, which is techelet Rambam. And so I have those sitting in a package that have been upstairs in my bedroom, I'm not joking, for 20 years, waiting for me to make a new talit to put them on. And I just keep telling myself, when I have some time, I'll tie these tzitzit onto a new talit, which I will make. And I have not found time. I've told myself over and over again, I will sit down and make myself a new talit, and then I will, because I made my old talit from scratch. I sewed it, by hand, and then when it started to fall apart after like a month, I took it to my grandmother, who sewed it with a sewing machine. So, anyways, you can't. But long-winded story explaining you can't really learn these things from the Gemara because the Gemara is going to screw you up. You can only learn these things from practice. Rabbi Judy, go ahead.
Okay, so I still think that the 9 notes can be equal to the longer note in terms of time, because I have heard it or maybe I'm thinking of another, where it's really
Yes.
right. No, that's okay. That's what we're talking. But more fascinating to me is your talit with the blue thread and the white threads. So you would take all those threads off your talit and then put them on, attach them to a new piece of fabric. Is that what you're saying you would do?
No, I have a completely an orphan set of tzitzit that are sitting in a package waiting to be put onto a talit or onto a garment.
Fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes sense.
They're still up. I could find them right now. I know exactly where
Can I tell our Israeli study partners that your installation was wonderful?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I did as little as possible.
Was
it recorded?
No, we're not allowed to record on Shabbat.
Oh, it was on Shabbat.
Yeah, but your friend's sermon was outstanding.
Yeah.
That's the kind of sermon I love.
Yeah.
It really was. And the story, I've heard the story he told about the rabbi going into the forest to cut wood for the widow who doesn't even know who's leaving the wood there.
Yeah.
I've heard it, but the way he taught us by giving you as an example of real goodness was fabulous. I hope some of the rabbis Beth Shalom took note.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you.
Well,
Rabbi,
would you ask
Rabbi,
it to him? Would
yeah,
you tell him? Yeah, it was
I
wonderful.
will. His name is Rabbi Dan Selsberg. He is the menschiest of menschy guys, and walking across the city for him was a no big deal. I was telling Paula, I think at Minion yesterday, that he got one piece of the story wrong, which was really funny. My friend Shalom, who, by the way, is the Shochet, is the same guy that I was mentioning before.
Okay.
That's the guy I walked across Jerusalem with to go. For the Israelis, the quick version of the story is we had a terrorist attack that kind of traumatized all of us. And then a few months later, my friend Shalom, who was working in an ambulance corps for Jerusalem, he was the first ambulance on the scene at a terrorist attack, and he was real shook up. So he slept at the Selsbergs, and then Karen Selsberg went into labor, and Karen and Dan went off to Hadassah and Kerem, and Shalom came 2 blocks away to my house and banged on the door at 2 o'clock in the morning and say, Karen's in labor, we should go to the hospital. So the part of the story that Rabbi Selsberg told slightly wrong was I said, okay, let's take a cab. And Shalom said, we can't, we have to walk. He got that backwards. The funny part of the story is Shalom is uber halachic, very observant, very strict, way stricter than me. And Shalom said to me at 2:30 in the morning, standing in the hallway, how do we get to Hadassah? Can we take a cab? And I said to Shalom, no, Shalom, we can't take a cab on Shabbat. The Selsbergs can take a cab on Shabbat because they have an emergency. We're just a couple of schmucks. We have to walk. And me and Shalom walked for 3.5 hours to Ein Kerem.
So
that's the funniest part of the story to me, is that Shalom, the uber halachic guy, was asking for psak halacha, from a legal opinion from me. And my answer was, no, dude, we can't do that. So,
And that was the second intifada?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, but it's funny. It's funny that we bring up Shalom Cantor twice in one thing. But yeah, Dan Selsberg is a master of the craft. He is, by the way, he is sort of repaying a debt that I paid to him, which is that when his boys, his twins, who were born, were bar mitzvah, I went to his synagogue in Bridgewater, New Jersey, and gave the sermon on their behalf and did basically the exact same thing, which was tell his entire congregation how unbelievably amazing Rabbi Dan Selsberg and Karen Selsberg are. So they just left yesterday morning. We had a great time. So Dan kept asking great questions about the synagogue. He was blown away by Beth Shalom. He just thought that we did amazing things, and he was like, you have minyan every day and every evening? Wow, that's incredible. You have a 6:30 minyan too? That's amazing, right?
And breakfast.
All right. Oh, I said, and I told him breakfast is better on the weekdays than it is at Kiddush. It was like he was dumbfounded by a lot of what we were able to accomplish.
Where is he located?
Bridgewater, New Jersey.
Oh, he is in Bridgewater,
Yeah.
long term. Okay.
Yeah, he's been there 7 years. He was in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada before that. All right, Renee's had her hand up forever. Go ahead, Renee.
Oh, it's okay. It's not forever. I just wanted to add my comment that I thought Saturday morning was just a beautiful program, a beautiful tribute. Okay. And I did go over to Rabbi and tell him how much I appreciated and how much I enjoyed his story. And, as a Jersey girl, I actually lived about 5 miles away from the synagogue in Bridgewater for a while. So,
Awesome.
but he is amazing.
Yeah, he's one of a kind. I'll tell a quick side story that is kind of incredible, which is and it's a story that tells you about congregations and rabbis almost more than any other. When we were coming out of rabbinical school, we do all these interviews in New York to find a congregation. And I interviewed at all of these congregations, and some of my colleagues interviewed at all these congregations, and Dan interviewed at all these congregations. I think I did 11 interviews. I think Dan did 13. He didn't get a single invitation to a congregation. He interviewed a little nervous, And but more important than that, I think congregations just somehow decided it wasn't what they were looking for. And he went through an entire round of interviewing with congregations and didn't find a single job. And then he re-interviewed a couple. He had to wait like 3 weeks till people went through placement, and then he had to re-interview with other congregations who didn't get a match. And I don't tell that story to embarrass him, because I think he's very public about that now. I tell that story to think of the bigger like Talmudic message out of that, which is there really are diamonds in the rough, right? Sometimes we are passing over the thing that is the most exceptional thing, or people don't see what's right in front of their face, which is there's something exceptional in the world, and somehow you miss it. So he wound up in Ontario, in Hamilton, and he revived a synagogue that was on death's door, which is really great. And then he had to come back to the United States because they have a third child who is special needs, and the Canadian educational system did not provide adequately for their son Eitan's education. So they had to come back home, and Karen's from New Jersey, yada, yada, yada. Anyways, okay, back to Talmud. This one is really interesting, and it's a good place to kind of pick it up. Judy, will you read this? It's number 9. Shiur Trua k'shalosh yevavot, v'hatanya shiur Trua k'shalosha shevarim.
The Mishnah continues, the length of a truah is equal to the length of 3 whimpers. The Gemara asks, isn't it taught in a Braita that the length of a truah is equal to the length of 3 shevarim, broken blasts, which presumably are longer than whimpers?
Very good. So a truah is our da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, it's 9, right? And it's the length of 3 shevarim, which is da-da-da, which you all know. But the Talmud has just done a really interesting thing. Let me go back, which is the Talmud in the Mishnah doesn't call them shevarim. The Talmud in the Mishnah calls them yevavot, okay? And the question is, what's a yevavah? And why is it called a yevavah? And the answer that the Gemara gives is, wait, there's another name for this in a baraita, right? Baraitot are the discarded cutting room floor edited pieces of the Mishnah. And it says, it uses the word shevarim, which is the word that we know today. The Mishnah uses the word yevavot, which implies to me, as someone who blows shofar and, reads from the machzor every year, maybe we should never have called them shevarim. Maybe we should have always called them yevavot. But for some reason, they get called shevarim in one place and yevavot in another. And you could also parallel ask the question, are these the same thing? Are we talking about the same name thing? Or is a shevarim and a yevavah not the same note? They just have the same phraseology in this baraita about them, right? That a truah is as long as a yevavah, and in other places say it's as long as a shevarim, which might mean that the shevarim and the yevavah are different sounding notes, different lengths of notes, but the Talmud is disagreeing about the length of a truah, right? That a truah has a different sound than we think it is. I hope you understood me there, right? The argument that I'm making is perhaps a yevavah is a quarter note and a shevarim is a half note. And the Talmud is really debating whether the truah is X number of beats long or Y number of beats long. All right, Mark, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
No. Well, you really addressed that question. That the end of this Mishnah, or the end of this section, says that presumably the shvarim are longer than whimpers, but it doesn't say for sure. So it sort of leaves us hanging in the air whether shvarim equal the word shvarim are equal to whimpers or not. I don't know. Yeah.
And I think so. The interesting thing here is the statement that I brought up is the kind of thing that the Tosafot would kind of dive into, or later commentaries might dive into, which is asking a fundamental question of whether a yevavah and a truah are the same. we kind of want to keep moving. So, the only time that I dove into you saw a couple like a month ago, the only time that I'm willing to dive into a Tosafot is if it's really, really fantastic and really takes us in. And this was one on women and mitzvot. I haven't had the chance to look at the Tosafot for this one, but even if there is one, but what I know from Tosafot is we usually wind up holding by them at some point. And so if we're going to wind up holding by them, we know what we wind up with today, which is we don't call them Yevavot. We call them Shivarim. Okay. With that, let's keep going and onward to get the answer to our question, or something resembling the answer to our question. Renee, did you read yet? You did not read. Would you mind reading for us? I'll read the Hebrew, and then I'm going to scroll down a little so that you can read the English. Actually, this is a mix of Hebrew and Aramaic. Amar Abaye, who's an Amora, right, a sage from the fourth generation or the third generation of the later part of the Talmud called the Gemara. Amar Abaye, Bahai Vadai, Pligi, Dichtiv, Yom Trua Ye Lechem, Turgamnan, Yom Yevava Yehe Lechon, Uchtiv, Be'ema de Sisera, Ba'ed HaChalon Nishkafa Vayat Beb et Sisera, Aim Sisera. Ma savar ganuche ganach, umar savar yalule yalel.
Abaye said, in this matter, the Tanaim certainly disagree. Although the first Baraita can be reconciled with the Mishnah, the second Baraita clearly reflects a dispute. As it is written, it is a day of sounding teruah, the shofar, to you. And we translate this verse in Aramaic as, it is a day of Yavava to you. And to determine a Yavava, the Gemara quotes a verse that is written about the mother of Sisera. Through the window she looked forth and wailed, Batayaba, the mother of Sisera. One sage, the Tana of the Baraita, holds that this means moanings, broken sighs, as in the blasts called Shavarim. And one sage, a Tana of the Mishnah, holds that it means whimpers, as in the short blasts called Teruah.
Great. So suddenly we have some clarity, which is that, and it explains a little bit why we get into really a difficult moment here when we talk about Yevavah, and when we talk about this thing at the very beginning of our Mishnah dealing with, it should be, a Yevavah should be the length of 3 teruot, right? We're really not clear about which of the notes is the Yevavah. It could be the Shavarim, or it could be the Truah. And that's really confusing. Now, that part is less interesting to me than the verse that they bring. So the verse that they bring at the beginning about Truah is very classic, right? There's Yom Truah Ye Lachem. It is a day of Truah for you. Why do we blow Truah on Rosh Hashanah? Because the Torah literally says blow a Truah on Rosh Hashanah. That's it. And why do we blow a tekiah? Because there's also a direct reference of blowing of the tekiah on this day, right? So what's a yevavah? Why do we blow this third? This is the important part, I think, for us. Why do we blow this third kind of note, parenthesis, which does not necessarily have Torah-itic basis, right? So basically, the Talmud is doing its classic thing, which is to say, it is saying anything that we do halachically in Judaism needs to have a basis in the text. So what text is the basis for this third note, which we call Yevavah? And the answer is the word Yavev appears in the story of Sisera. Okay, so we're going to go back and do a little bit of the story of Sisera. I'm going to describe the story to you because the verse doesn't actually come from the story. It comes from the song. What am I talking about? For those of us who are really go to synagogue every week and never miss a day, and for those of us who are really good at Tanakh, you probably know this story. But if you don't know this story very well, don't worry. I don't begrudge you it at all. It's a deep cut, as they say, a little bit. There is the story of Devorah and the judges, and the story of Yael and Sisera, which is a great, great story and has some of the best medieval art for feminists in the world, right? The story of Yael and Sisera is this. Sisera was a Philistine general, and he was coming to make war on the Israelite tribes. And Devorah, one of the great judges of the time, said to Yael, this woman, and by the way, I bet you the Israelis know this story really well, because this is the kind of thing it's taught in school really well in Israel, because it's a truly Zionist story, right? It's about, and it's not only is it a Zionist story, it's a Zionist feminist story. So like the
Also lovely and gory.
right, it's also very violent. High school kids love this stuff, right? So Devorah says to Yael, go out and kill Sisera. I believe actually, if you look at the details of the story, I believe it's Yael who basically says to Devorah, I can do this thing. And Devorah says, that's kind of dangerous. I don't know if you want to do that. And Yael says, I'm on it. I'm going to do it. She goes, she kind of seduces Sisera and gets him drunk. And he falls asleep in his tent. And then she takes the tent peg from out of the side of the tent and a hammer and drives it through his temple. Killing the general, terrifying the army, discombobulating them, at which point the Israelites attack and destroy the Philistine army. And Yael is this great hero in the story. So that's not actually what we're quoting this verse from, interestingly enough. We're quoting the verse from the section that follows, which is called the Song of Devorah. And the Song of Devorah is a kind of like a battle hymn, to the battle. Just as, I've never really thought of this, but just as we don't learn the history of the War of 1812 from the Star-Spangled Banner, so too we cannot learn the details of the war between the Israelites and the Philistines at this time by learning the Song of Sisera. So, Judy, do you mind if I read this before you ask your question? Is that okay? So we're going to start back a little bit. I'm going to read the English until we get to the Hebrew that is relevant to us. Tevorach minashim, most blessed of women be Yael, wife of Heber the Kenite, most blessed of women intense. He asked for water, she offered milk. In a princely bowl, she brought him curds. Her left hand reached for the tent pin, her right for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera, crushed his temple, smashed and pierced his temple. They're different words. Crushed his head, smashed and pierced his temple, sorry. At her feet he sank, lay outstretched. At her feet he sank, lay still. Where he sank, there he lay, destroyed. This sounds better as poetry, obviously. Through the window peered Sisera's mother. Behind the lattice she whined. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why so late the clatter of his wheels? We don't really ever hear of Sisera's mother, except in this verse. This is her only appearance in the entire Tanakh. And here's the Hebrew. Ba'ed hachalon nishkafa v'yit yabev, right? Yavava. Em Sisera ba'ed ha'eshnan nav. Madua bashesh richvo lavo. Matua echeru pe'amim merakbotan tav. So, right, why is his chariot so long in coming? And the translation here is whined. I'm going to click on the O and see. My guess is that the Hebrew is going to say meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Let's find out. Or gazed, meaning of Hebrew uncertain. Someone went to rabbinical school and read all of the JPS commentary and knows that every commentary in JPS is going to say meaning of Hebrew uncertain. So anyway, so that's what Yevava is, Vayat Bev. It appears here, and we're not entirely sure what it means. And of course, our rabbis of the Talmud are not entirely sure what it means. They think that it's some sort of funny sound, and they're not sure whether it's kind of a moan, or whether it's a cry. Right? I did that pretty good, huh? I offer thanks to my drama teacher, Ted Walsh, who gave me all the theatrics of the rabbinate, possibly. All right, question. Go ahead, Judy. Or comment.
Yeah, no, I was just, when I remember the story, and it's unforgettable because she gave him hot, warm milk, and that made him sleepy. And he fell asleep. And so here it mentions you said got him drunk, but here it mentions, and the simplicity of it is, I once gave a speech to a group of Christian women about the two, about Yael and, oh God, now I'm blanking, the one who cut off the general's head.
Judith.
Judith and Holofernes, yeah.
That's who I was named after, right? And
All right.
they wanted me to give a talk about Mary. And I said, no, I'm not doing that.
Nice. Yeah, well, you actually brought up exactly the problem that I have all the time, which is I mix up those two stories. I believe that it's the Yehudit story that involves wine and the Yael story that involves milk, and I transpose them all the time because I have a bad memory. But I transpose. I'm a little bit of the nutty professor in that I get a lot of the intricate details, but the basic details sometimes I err.
But the truth is, one of the two, Judith, is in the Apocrypha. The Christians included it in the Hebrew Bible.
Right.
The Jews did not, because these Jewish guys who wrote it all down, two Jewish women assassins is one too many. It's very scary.
Well done.
As well as it should be.
You sound like my dream class. Maybe we'll put you on the panel, Judy. My dream class for sometime in the future is Beth Shalom has two eminent scholars of feminist Judaism. We have Dr. Rachel Cranston, who is the head of Jewish history at Pitt, and we have Rabbi Dr. Rachel Adler, who is the author of Engendering Judaism. And when the time is right, I would like to have some sort of symposia where we put a bunch of women on the dais to kind of pontificate about, whither and when feminism in Judaism today. I don't have a whole class planned out, but like basically put a bunch of smart women up on the bima to say radical things and then watch all the men want to hide under their seats. I can't wait. So, all right, go ahead, Elisheva.
I was just going to say, I always both remember that Yael gives him milk. But I also like it because she invites him in to take care of him. And milk, you don't suspect. Wine, you might suspect. But milk, this is comforting, this is nutritious. But warm milk will definitely put you to sleep when you're tired.
Yeah.
And it's brilliant. I mean, the deviousness of it is just wonderful.
Yeah. and I think the amazing thing is, of course, let's bring it back, which is to link it to the shofar. You could say, oh, it appears in the Tanakh, and therefore the rabbis are just going to use it. Most of my scholarly colleagues would say it's not for nothing that they linked it here, which begs the question, which I think any one of us could try and answer. I don't have a good answer for it. Why this verse here linked to the shofar? Like, what is the crying of the mother of Sisera, and why is it linked to the shofar? And moreover, like thinking about, and I think it gets out also at the question of what the sound of the shofar is meant to invoke for us on the day. What do the three notes of the shofar mean? What are they parallel to, and why do we hear them as such, right? So we all know, I think, that the Tikiyah is meant to awaken us to tshuva, but a question of like, what are the shavarim and the truah meant to do for us? And there's lots of commentary that talks about them being crying and wailing. But what are we wailing for? Like, what is the sadness that we are invoking on this day? In this case, it's very odd. It's the sadness of a Philistine mother for her son who has not returned from battle, basically. And by the way, I'll add one more thing, which is, I think, the next line, Um, I just bring this up because it's not for nothing, or it is for nothing. It has nothing to do with anything, but it's very interesting because I've never noticed this line in the Tanakh before. Hochmot saroteha ta'aneha afhi tashiv amreha la. The wisest of her ladies, right? They assume that Sisera's mother had ladies in waiting. We kind of assume she's like a princess of her people. They reply this: they must be dividing the spoil they have found, a damsel or two for each man, spoil of dyed cloth for Sisera, spoil of embroidered cloths, a couple of embroidered cloths round every neck as spoil. It's a really interesting little mention there that like Sisera's mom's ladies in waiting say, oh, he's late coming back from battle because they got so much stuff when they won that they're divvying it up and it's just taking them forever to do it, right? Which is like this really interesting kind of mention that like, oh, they thought they won, and we all know that Sisera's never coming home from that battle because he invited the wrong girl over for dinner, right? So very interesting. All right, to finish, right, the rabbis are disagreeing about whether it's a yevava or whether yevava means trua or whether it means shivarim. All right, let's see if we can get any resolution to this question. I actually think we don't get any resolution and they just are going to move right along, which leaves us in limbo, which is great because the Talmud does that, right? The Talmud will occasionally just say, we're not sure what the length of these notes are, and we're not sure which of these is the right one and which one is the wrong one. All right, with that, Noreen, do you mind reading 11 for us?
I will do that.
All right. Tanu Rabbanan, minayin sheba shofar, Talmud lomar, v'ha'avarta shofar tru'ah.
The sages taught in a Baraita, from where is it derived that the soundings of Rosh Hashanah must be performed with a shofar? The verse states, then you shall make proclamation with the blast of the shofar on the 10th day of the 7th month. On the Day of Atonement, you shall make proclamation with the shofar throughout all your land.
Okay. If this is about to sound familiar to some of you who are our longest standing students in this class, anyone who was here, my God, 3 years ago, I think, or 3.5 years ago, this entire, maybe it's not that long ago, maybe it was only like a year ago that we did this, but we have already seen this before. The Talmud is reinserting an argument from earlier in the Gemara back in here. This is a thing that happens from time to time. The Talmud is either intentionally repeating itself to bring up a new idea or to reinforce an idea, or it is a poorly edited document. Depending on which scholars you listen to is the opinion that you will give here. Traditionalists would say the Talmud, every word is sacred, nothing is poorly edited, it's all meant to be there. Other folks who are more obnoxious like me would say, yeah, I feel a little uncomfortable if they kind of put this back in there. It feels a little bit like sloppy editing. So depends who you ask. So the point that they're making is the Talmud will tell us you should blow the shofar, but it's going to go and say on the Day of Atonement, you shall make proclamation with the shofar throughout all your land. There is, as we're going to get to, an interpretation that the blowing of the shofar on the Day of the Atonement was about the release of debts in the sabbatical year or in the Yovel year. And it is not, the shofar was not actually meant to be blown on an annual basis for Rosh Hashanah. It was actually only meant to be blown once every 50 years to let everyone know, hey, the land that you got from your buddy Dave that you won at a poker game when he was drunk one night, you got to give it back now. The shofar is the official determinant that it's time to return Dave's land back to him. All right, let's keep going so that you can read that out loud. Mark, why don't you read this to us? I'll do the Aramaic. Actually, this is Hebrew. Ein li ela beyovel b'Rosh Hashanah minayin Talmud lomar b'chodesh hashvi'i she'ein Talmud lomar b'chodesh hashvi'i uma Talmud lomar b'chodesh hashvi'i she'yu kol tru'ah shel chodesh shvi'i ze ka ze.
From this, I have derived the halacha only with regard to Yom Kippur of the Jubilee year. Well, where do I derive that the soundings of Rosh Hashanah must also be made, but it must also be with a shofar? The verse states of the 7th month. since there is no need for the verse to state of the seventh month, as it already states on the Day of Atonement, what is the meaning of the verse says of the seventh month? This comes to teach that all the obligatory foundings of the seventh month must be similar to one another.
Great. So we do a class. We're going to end on this. We do a classic Gemara move, which is to read a verse in the Torah, right? And our verse in the Torah, of course, is V'havarta shofar tru'ah, but then it continues in the Hebrew to say a little bit more, and we're actually going to look at it in the Hebrew so that we get the whole verse. V'havarta shofar tru'ah b'chodesh hashvi'i, which they didn't quote. Be'esar hachodesh b'yom kippurim tavru shofar b'kol artzechem. So the interpretation here is the back end of the verse teaches us blow the shofar to proclaim the Yovel for the Jubilee year. The front end of the verse, which I did not need, because all of us know that Yom Kippur falls in the month of Tishrei, the seventh month of the year, right? We don't need both those pieces of information, Yom Kippur, right, and Tishrei. It is as if to say, yea, verily, one shall celebrate President's Day, comma, which occurs in February. All of us know that President's Day occurs in February. We need to hang something else on the fact that we are taught about February here, right? And so what the rabbis are teaching is the blowing of shofar for Rosh Hashanah, we learn from the words B'chodesh Hashvi'i. The blowing of shofar for Yovel, we learn from the words Bayom HaKippurim. Okay? So it's for those of us who don't really understand that. If you don't understand that, that's totally fine. It's not an entirely internally logical perspective, because the Talmud doesn't have the kind of, the Talmud doesn't follow the logic that we all follow. The Talmud has its own logic, and the Talmud's logic here is basically, right, if you give additional extraneous information in a verse of Torah, the additional extraneous information must be linked to another piece, right? Every little line in the Torah has to have meaning. There are no superfluous words in our Torah. Elisheva, you get the last word, and then we're going to call it a day.
I think it also, we are, especially as modern people, are so used to reading expository prose, which is worked out to follow a logical pattern. The Talmud is conversations. Conversations wander all over the place.
Yep.
And that's what we have, and it's part of why I love it.
Right. I mean, there's another way of looking at this very briefly, which is to say the rabbis know exactly what they're doing, meaning they're pulling things out because they want to pull things out. And I don't think we have to argue that at all, because we have already seen earlier in our Gemara where Rabban Gamliel is trying to reboot Judaism after the destruction of the temple, and he's hanging things on very thin little ledges, right? He's deriving ideas about the direction that rabbinic Judaism needs to go in off of very flimsy logical premises. And that's because the rabbinic enterprise is about expanding the Torah, the Talmud, to make it relevant. All right, we're going to call it a day. We'll be back next week. And I hope you all have a great, for those of you in America, have a great Labor Day. Enjoy our miserable weather outside. And for those of you in Israel, Yins be well. We'll see you soon.
Rabbi Mark, can I speak to you for a moment?